To prep these for painting, I want to do two things. The first one is sand, and the second one is prime. These are made from pretty soft pine. Pine tends to be a really soft wood. So from being in a retail store and sort of tossed around in a bin with other wood things, and then being tossed around in my workroom in another bin of wood things, these have a lot of dings on them. I'm of two minds. One is sand the heck out of them and try and get them smooth, and the other one is embrace the dings, because if you don't learn to love them, they will drive you crazy. So my weapons of choice are sanding blocks and plain old emery boards, which are really just sandpaper on a stick. And emery boards are good for little things like this trim right here. It's much easier to sand with this board than it is to sand with the block. And that way I maintain my nice straight trim rather than getting it all mushy with the sanding block, which is going to sort of round everything off. So my mission is just to sand everything until it's smooth. And you really want to sand in the direction of the grain, which is very obvious on pine. This is with the grain. This would be going against the grain. So I just want to sand to get all the little burrs off. And then I'm probably going to open this up and do a little sanding of the doors. And a couple of these have doors that are stiff, like this one. This door really doesn't want to open really well. So I'm going to take my emery board and just sand down the top and bottom to keep it from sticking so much. And it might take a few tries before I get it right. But eventually I'll end up with something that doesn't stick quite so much. Once you've sanded, it's helpful to wipe down the piece with something soft, like a paper towel or an old piece of t-shirt is a great thing to get all the dust off. And also you can sort of feel places where the tool that you're wiping down with catches on things. Like right along here is where the tool seems to be, the paper towel seems to be catching. There's some rough spots. And that's where this emery board really comes in handy, because I can get in here in a way that I couldn't with a sanding block or with a piece of sandpaper, which I always have trouble getting sandpaper into the nooks and crannies that I want to sand. So an emery board is a handy thing to use. So I'm thinking that this is pretty close to being completely sanded. It's got some dings on it, but like I said, I'm just going to embrace those because this little cabinet has been through a war, and I'm not going to try and pretend that it's going to be smooth and perfect. I'm just going to go ahead and paint in a style that allows for a little imperfection. rather than try and make this perfect. So all of my cabinets have been sanded and wiped down, so they're free of dust. And those of you who have been with me for a while will know this trick. If it's wood, it needs a sealer coat, and for me, that means a little bit of matte medium. And this will work with any clear acrylic medium. And a little bit of water. And generally, I don't want to water down matte medium more than 50% because it breaks the binder down and it makes it not stick to the piece as well. So, and I'm not using straight matte medium because I don't want that thick coat on this wood. I want to sort of see the grain a little bit. So I'm just going to apply a light coat. This is a little bit too wet. So I'm just going to apply this light coat over all the surfaces. And I'm going to start off by applying it with the doors closed, and then I'm going to open it up and do the back side of the doors and the interior. And I'm sort of going with the grain in my application. So I'm not going across like this, I'm going with the grain of the wood. And generally when you work on wood, everything that you do on it, you want to do with the grain. So sanding, priming, painting, everything with the grain. And the reason that I'm doing this little primer coat is because wood, particularly pine, which is a soft wood, is very absorbent and tends to suck paint and also glue and everything else you put on it. So a little coat to keep it from absorbing the paint is a good thing. This also gives me an opportunity to, when the wood gets wet like this, the grain of the wood gets raised a little bit. So this is an opportunity for me to put a clear coat on here, raise the grain, and then have an opportunity to sand it one more time. So if I'm doing this primer and the doors swell because the grain gets raised, I can open the doors up, sand them down, and have them back to being easily opened without scuffing up a paint job. Did that make sense? I'm sort of working back and forth between this sponge brush and a paper towel because I don't want little puddles of this matte medium left behind. just want the wood to absorb a little bit of it, and that's it. So anything that isn't absorbed right away, I'm wiping off. So there's obviously too much here. Just wipe that away. And there's too much right here. So we're going to wipe that away. So just enough to get it a little wet and let the wood absorb a little bit. These have been drying for a couple of hours, and it's a little humid here today, so I might let these sit overnight. But I can already tell that these doors that closed easily before are now sort of hanging up on the top and the bottom. So I need to do a little more sanding and then another coat of sealer where I sand. Kind of same thing with this one. It's hanging up right along here. So because the liquid has been sucked into the grain of the wood, it's caused a little bit of swelling. So I expected this to happen, and it's not a big deal. And it's better for it to happen now while I can resand and reseal than it would be if it happened later while I was painting, when more sanding would damage the paint job that I was doing. So sanding and sealing is what I'll be doing for probably the rest of today.